First off, you're going to have a catch-up lecture on, I expect to post it by Friday. Not before then. There will be eating to be done. There will be pajamas to be worn. It will be very important. One of my friends told me that her whole family has to, woo, good. And then we're going to talk about that. Her whole family has to dress up in like church clothes for Thanksgiving.
That sucks.
I'm like, no, you need stretchy pants, man. What the heck? So yeah, and then that's the other thing I want to talk about. So what's going to happen with the lecture on Friday is, I'm not sure if it's going to cover urinary system or lymphatic or maybe a little bit of both. But whatever it is, I will tell you on the lecture when and what your quiz will be over, okay? I haven't decided yet whether it's going to be Monday. I think it should be, because it's not like people, I mean, you're going to be back on Monday, right? And really, how much can you actually talk to your family, and how many board games do you want to play? Really?
What would be mentally
What?
That's the question.
We play board games until the kids start crying, right? There's this really fun game called Anomia. Anybody ever played Anomia? Okay, go grab it. It's just a card game. It's like $12 or something. It's a little card game. And it's amazing. It's all about words that you can't remember, coming up with the words the fastest. And it's awesome until people start crying. So that one's great. But anyway, so I will tell you on the recording what I'm going to quiz you over, and it probably will be Monday, right? Because if I don't, then you won't study until next Tuesday, which is too long to go, really. And then this thing that we are going to start, we'll start after Thanksgiving break. I will post this for you with a link. It's not going to be worth much because I don't want it to be worth a ton. It's going to be worth a little, but consistent amounts for all of you. It will be worth 3 percentage points on your 4th test. Okay, that's what it's going to be worth. You will make a donation. Don't give money. I don't want your money. You will make a donation to the homeless youth shelter in downtown Salt Lake City. And you'll make sure that I know that you made a donation, and I'll just keep those bonus points for you. And hopefully you'll make somebody's Christmas a little better. They'll have like clean socks and clean underwear and some nail clippers and stuff like that. But you certainly don't need to do it. And by the way, everything doesn't have to be new either. Gently used things that you have. I will put a list up on the link when I put it up there as to what they said that they need, because that's a partial list, but there's a complete list on the website of what they said they need. Go ahead.
When do we need to turn that in?
I don't know. I'm going to start it. When do
The end of this month. Or actually, end of December, sorry.
End of the semester?
End of the semester, yeah.
Okay. I want you to do it before then. Let's say that I will want you to do it before the 4th test so that I have that score, right?
They don't have to take it up there. They can just put the stuff in the box and you can check them off.
Take it. Oh, no. That's what the box is here for. Yeah, the box is here for that. And if you don't want to donate, that's totally fine. Nobody is rooking you into it. And they need things like coats and that kind of stuff too. And you may have coats that you don't like that your grandmother bought you and then she forgot that you hated purple. Or that used to fit you and didn't fit you. And it's a homeless youth shelter, so the ages go from. Do the ages go from like 13?
No, I think they go from like 10.
10 and up? Yeah. Whatever. Okay, so we're going to start on urinary system. Urinary system is really interesting, and there's some interesting phys that goes with it. So before we get into the actual physical structures, what I want you guys to do is to get an understanding that you may or may not have had before, most of my students haven't, about what the urinary system is trying to accomplish. So I know that we think of the urinary system as getting rid of waste products, but it's so much bigger than that, and it's really important physiology to understand. So what happens at the kidney is the place where you send your blood through, right? And then you actually cleanse it, right? But you also change the composition. And then whatever comes out of your blood at the kidney ends up in your pee. So you're doing this process by which you're basically, once you get into the kidney, you get these microscopic blood tubes, capillaries, yes. Porous, microscopic blood tubes, capillaries. Right next to porous, microscopic P tubes, which is not what they're called. It's called the uriniferous tubules, but that means P tube last time I checked. Okay, so blood tubes next to P tubes. And what happens is, imagine you've got two conveyor belts going by one another, okay? And these two conveyor belts are going by one another, and you are actively picking what goes into what place as it goes by these tubes. And think of it kind of the way that you thought about fetal circulation. You want the maternal and fetal capillaries to be next to one another, so you have a lot of exchange, but you never want to hook them to each other, right? Same thing in the kidneys with urine and pee. You don't want to hook your urine to your pee, right? Your blood to your pee. You do want to hook your urine to your pee. You don't want to hook your blood to your pee, but you want them to run close to each other so that you can do exchange between them. Does that make sense? So the way that that is going to occur is you are going to have two tubes running by one another. This isn't an anatomical drawing. It's a physiological drawing. And so what we're going to have is a blood tube and a pee tube. Okay? And they're going to be right next to one another. They're going to be microscopically separated from each other. You're going to have just football field size area that they have exchange for blood and urine. Okay, so conceptually, before we go any further, all the blood that goes into the kidney will ultimately come from what vessel? The blood that goes into the kidney comes from what vessel? Yes, renal artery. Yeah. And the blood that leaves the kidney will go into what vessel? Renal vein, yes. Don't you hate it when I try to make you put one thing together with the other? It's really annoying. I hate it too. Okay, and then the urine, so this is circulating, right? So we've got a conveyor belt that's going in and out, and it continues to go through, right? We have opportunities to take things from it and put things in. But this is a circle, right? It might be a big convoluted circle, but ultimately it's all going to end up back there again. This is not a circle. This is blind end, right? It starts in the kidney and it ends up in the toilet, right? Got it? Starts in the kidney and ends up in the toilet and doesn't circulate. You basically get one opportunity to make sure that it goes in there. Okay, so what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up doing three processes, and they're later in your notes, but we'll talk about them now because it seems to be more successful if you start with an understanding from the beginning of what we're trying to accomplish. So there are three processes that you are going to do in order to make this occur. The first process is pressure-driven, okay? So before we go any further, just hypothesize which of these two fluids is going to be higher pressure. The blood, because it's got a pump hooked up to it, so it's going to be higher pressure. So the first process is going to be the process of filtration, and filtration will push stuff, water, and anything that will fit through the holes from high pressure to low pressure, right? And so the process of, for instance, like making coffee is filtration. Water goes through, and anything that will fit through the holes goes through. Well, this is the same concept. So what gets filtered into the urine? This it's a really general process. It's just anything that will fit through the holes. So you get boatloads of water. 47 gallons of water per day is filtered, which means you're going to have a boatload of work figuring out how to get 46.75 of it back into your body. So water, and you lose any small solutes. And small solutes include good stuff and bad stuff. So nutrients like glucose and amino acids, and also wastes. So the other metaphor that I like to use for this process is that cleansing your blood at the kidneys is like cleaning a house in hoarders, okay? So what happens is you look in the house and you're just like, oh, I don't even know where to start. So what you do is you take everything that you can fit through the door, the holes, out, and you dump it onto the lawn, which includes 12 cat boxes that are filled with poop, but also includes your mother's china and a box of money that you forgot that you had, right? So you dump it all out onto the lawn. You don't intend to leave it all out there, but you had to sort of make one fell swoop. So that's filtration. And you filter an awful lot more than you're actually going to get rid of, because now what you start doing is you start picking through it and deciding what's worth bringing back into the house. And that process is reabsorption. Okay, now what do you reabsorb? Well, you reabsorb a whole bunch of water, because even the worst peer does not pee 47 gallons per day, right? So you reabsorb a whole bunch of water. How about glucose and amino acids? Do you reabsorb those? Those are money. Those are like the most valuable things that you have. So you reabsorb all of the nutrients that you possibly can. And then there's some stuff that you might need some of, but not others. So the rest of it is as needed. So for instance, what if it's something that's not like trash? Like a hoarder has 360 packs of toilet paper, right? And then you're like cleaning through your house and you're like, what the hell with all the toilet paper? And you dump it all out onto the lawn. But then you figure out, okay, we don't need 360, but we need some of the toilet paper back in, right? So you reabsorb things as needed. You do that with like ions and stuff. So water, nutrients as needed. So it looks like you would be done, but the next thing you need to do is you need to remember that this was a very general process. And now I need to go through one more process in which I go into the house and I look under every bed and I open every cabinet and I find 12 more cat boxes, right? And I find another 35 rolls of toilet paper, right? Because I didn't see them the first time because I wasn't specifically looking for things that I needed to get rid of. So the next stage is a very specific stage in which you go look for the specific things that you needed to get rid of. This was just anything that fit through the door. This is looking for the cat boxes, right? It's also looking for the toilet paper that you didn't catch the first time. So what ends up being secreted? What ends up being secreted is mostly wastes, because you're looking for those specifically, and then excesses, right? That extra toilet paper that you found that you didn't find the first time. Does that make sense? So by the time you do this, which was general, this was specific to keep, this was specific to chunk, right? Then what you're going to end up with is what gets peed out, right? When you are finished with these three processes, what gets peed out is called excretion. Good? Now, can you conceptualize now that the stuff that goes into the renal artery, the blood that goes into the renal artery, will be different than the blood that leaves the renal veins in some very, very predictable ways? First off, of course, it's going to be lower volume, right? You're going to lose some of the fluid as you go through, right? Should have less waste products, should have more specific amounts of the things that you need, and should hopefully retain all of the nutrients, right, on a good day. That makes sense to you? Okay, so this is what's going on at your kidneys. And it's going on with this massive surface areas that happens once you get down to the microscopic layers of the kidneys. And we're going to put that back together when we get to the end of the lecture today. Everybody good with that? Okay. Okay, so what your kidneys are doing, and what everybody has known for a long time, long before you got to high school or college, is that you knew that the kidneys produce and store urine, okay? But now we can broaden it a little bit, and we see that producing and storing urine is not just getting rid of waste products, it's also deciding what you want to keep, which deciding when you have too much of, what you have too little of. In addition, can you also see that if your kidneys determine how much pee you make, stick with me for a second, are they not also determining how much blood volume you have? Because if you pee more, then you have less blood volume, right? That has a direct impact on your blood pressure. Okay? Do you know the relationship between blood volume and blood pressure? If you have higher blood volume, what does it do to your blood pressure? No, higher blood volume is higher pressure. Lower blood volume is lower pressure. So this is the thing that I want to give you guys an insight into. In physiology, when you talk about the urinary system, you don't even talk as much about getting rid of waste as you talk about how important the kidneys are in regulating your cardiovascular function. Your kidneys are intimately related to your cardiovascular function because if they determine blood volume, they determine blood pressure. So those two things are part of the same story. Okay, and then another way that your kidneys are actually regulating your cardiovascular function is that your kidneys are what gets to decide when you make red blood cells. So interesting little tidbit. When blood goes through the kidneys assess whether there is high, low, or normal amounts of oxygen in the blood. If the kidneys encounter hypoxia, what they will do is produce a hormone that targets your red bone marrow to make red blood cells. So basically, you can't, once you get into phys, you can't talk about kidneys without cardiovascular system, and you can't talk about cardiovascular system without talking about kidneys. So does that make sense to you guys? Okay, all right. Okay, so now let's start on the anatomy. Okay, the gross anatomy of the urinary system is super duper easy. You got your kidneys, okay? The kidneys are retroperitoneal. Do you remember what that means? Yeah, they were behind the parietal peritoneum, right? Before you actually put the saran wrap in the dish, they were in the dish first. Okay, so they are retroperitoneal. They're about the size of a bar of soap. The right one is slightly lower than the left one. Anybody know why? It's not lung. It is.
Oh, liver.
Yeah, it's the liver. You want to hear something interesting and completely like not necessarily related to what we're talking about, but kind of, and I have to be here so I get to tell stories. Okay, so it's slightly lower, which means that if the right kidney sits slightly lower, then the right ureter sits slightly lower, which means the entire urinary system is kind of pushed down a little lower, and the entire right side is pushed down a little lower. For that reason, in males, the right testicle always hangs lower than the left testicle. So you can go home and do a little self-analysis and see if that's true. It's pretty important because you don't want them clapping together, right? Like one of them has to hang lower. It's true. And that's how they diagnose. So I learned this because, I don't know if I told you guys this, but every once in a while somebody has all of the structures in their abdominal pelvic cavity flopped, right? Guess one of the ways to diagnose that before you even open them up. If you have a male and they're doing a regular physical exam and you look at their testicles and the left one is lower, then that is one of the first indications that you might have situs inversus totalis, which means everything is flipped, right? So the liver's over on this side, so all of that stuff gets pushed slightly lower, right? What?
Is that bad?
No, not usually. Sometimes they don't even notice until like very, very late. Every once in a while somebody's like, I'm listening for your heart. It's over here. The heart's on the right side. Lungs are flipped. Liver's flipped. Spleen's flipped. Everything's flipped. They have one of those. They have a situs inversus totalis torso dissected at the body donor program. So we go see it every time. And they figured that out because the testicles. So like some just general practitioner was like giving him a physical exam and he's like, yeah, he's like, I want to check something out. And the guy was like, why do you know that? I don't. And then he wanted to donate his body to the body donor program. This is a different guy than the guy who's actually there. And the body donor program wouldn't take him because it's about 80 or 90 man hours to get dissection done. And you don't want to give situs inversus totalis to a med student, do you? Because what are they going to get in their head? Everything's going to be broken in their head. So whenever they run into one, situs inversus totalis, they go take it from the medical students immediately. And then they have to start on another one. They're like, oops, sorry. Because you don't really know until you open them up that they're like that. Unless you're a male. So you guys can assess and then figure out where your heart is. And you don't have to report back to us, but you just restore that information in your head. As a matter of fact, please don't. It's going to make everybody feel weird. Okay, so I don't know why I wanted to tell you that. I just did. Because it was a testicle story, and I'm me. Okay, so now let's look at the kidneys. Okay, so location and gross anatomy. They are in the lumbar region of, just in the lumbar region, the right and left lumbar regions. They sit kind of below the last two ribs, right? So they're right here. The adrenal or suprarenal glands sit on top of them, but they're not that big. I don't know why everybody draws them that way. And they're not directly related to kidney function. I mean, they produce one hormone related to kidney function, but the other 5 that they produce are not related to kidney function. So they just happen to be sitting there. But they're called the adrenal or suprarenal glands. And as far as the kidneys go, this region right here on the medial surface where all the tubes come and go, that's called the hilus or hilum. That's a really common term for anything where all the tubes attach, and you'll see it in the ovary, and you'll see it a couple other places too. It was in the lungs too, right? The hilum or hilus. Yeah, so that's just a common, like, where all the tubes go thing. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to look at how the kidneys stay where they are against the body wall, because they're not hanging by mesentery, because they're retroperitoneal, right? So how do they stay back there? Well, they're packed back there. So here's the liver for orientation. Here's the stomach, right? Here's the muscles of the back, including the erector spinae muscles. You kind of with me? Okay, so how do the kidneys stay back there if they're not hung from the body wall by mesentery? The way that I think about them is they're in the box, right? They're in the dish, and then you're going to put packing material around them, like packing peanuts or something, and then you're going to strap packing tape on top of them to stick them to the body wall, but then you're going to do that again. They've got 2 layers of packing material, 1 layer tape, another layer tape, and they are stuck against the body wall. But the packing material is actually what's surrounding them, so keep that in mind. Okay, so let's look at what's surrounding them. Okay, so do you see the layer that is the bright white layer that forms the boundary of the kidney? Do you see that? That is called the, what the hell is it called? Fibrous capsule, or the renal capsule. And it's made of dense irregular connective tissue, and it's got a whole bunch of macrophages in it too. And it's really important for keeping urinary tract infections from moving into the body cavity as a whole. Your urinary tract is open to the outside world, right? So you can get a UTI, right? You can get it in your bladder. It can move up your ureters and into your kidneys, and you can get a kidney infection. Okay, so why does it not move out of your kidneys? Because this area that you've got has macrophages in it, and it localizes the infection to that location. Does that make sense? Okay, now look at this layer of packing material that's immediately superficial to the kidneys. That is fat, and the fat that's closest to the kidneys is called the perinephric fat. Okay, that's your first layer of packing material. And then look, here's your tape. Do you see the tape that is just superficial to the perinephric fat? That's called the renal fascia, okay? And then I've got another layer of packing material. That's called the paranephric fat. And only after that do I run into the parietal peritoneum, which is the most superficial layer of tape. That makes sense? So this isn't something that you can see very easily when it's projected, but if you have it in front of you, it's actually pretty easy to go through it. So you've got the fibrous capsule, then the perinephric fat, and the renal fascia, and the paranephric fat, then the parietal peritoneum. Okay, and that's how the kidneys stay back there. They're like packing material and tape. But now we need to revisit what we said in the beginning of the semester. If they're just stuck back there against the body wall with packing material and tape, then what happens if you lose your packing material? Well, what happens if you lose your packing material is that they can slide between the body wall and the parietal peritoneum. They can slide down, like if someone is in starvation conditions because of some chronic disease that they cannot eat, right? Or if somebody has anorexia and they lose massive quantities of weight really quickly, right? What can happen is your kidneys can fall. Now, the problem with that is that there is no mechanism for the kidneys to stop urine production, and the ureter gets kinked. And so the urine, which is basically waste products you were trying to get rid of, just backs up and bathes the kidney and will eventually cause kidney failure if it's not corrected. I don't know if you guys know this, but people with anorexia are at relatively high risk of kidney failure compared to the population at large. And that's one of the reasons that that occurs. They're at high risk of death for a bunch of different reasons, but that's one of them. That makes sense to you guys? Okay, so now let's look at the internal gross anatomy of the kidney. And the internal gross anatomy of the kidney is actually relatively easy. And it actually looks pretty much like the picture. I mean, far more than a lot of things do. Like look at the light area around the outside, you can find it here, right? Look at the pyramids, you can find them here and here, right? So I want to look at the gross anatomy of the kidney. So we already had our fibrous capsule, right? That was the part that was around the outside. And then just deep to that, we're going to run into a cortex and then a medulla. And cortex and medulla is very, very common, as I mentioned. Anytime you've got an organ with an outer and an inner layer, The outer layer is very likely to be called the cortex, and then the medulla is going to be deep. So it's that way with the ovaries, it's that way with the kidneys, it's that way with the adrenal glands, a bunch of different places. So here's the cortex, this lighter layer around the outside. Everybody good? And then the medulla has all the pyramids in it. And so the pyramids, just to tell you what those are going to do, and then we'll come back and add detail to it. The pyramids are the site of urine production. So what you do with the pyramid is you start producing urine right about here, just on the outside between the cortex and the base of the pyramid. And then they're going to produce urine, and then it is going to go through tubes that will all converge at the tip of the pyramid. So do you see how it looks like there are tubes that are converging at the tip? That's why it looks like that, okay? So it's going to converge at the tip of the pyramid. The tip of the pyramid, somebody decided to look like a nipple, so it's going to be called the renal papilla. Yep, because you got to have a kidney nipple. You had some heart nipples, you got some brain nipples. Here's your kidney nipple, okay? So this is the renal papilla right here. So the urine is going to be produced from the base to the tip of this triangle. Okay, so these triangles collectively are called either the renal pyramids or the medullary pyramids because they're in the medulla. Either one is fine. Doesn't make any difference. So urine production is going to happen from here to here. Okay, the spaces between them are called columns. This is a pyramid. Usually you have between 8 and 15 pyramids. It doesn't really matter how many you have. It seems like if you have smaller ones, you got more of them, and if you got bigger ones, you have fewer of them. Okay, between 8 and 15. And all of these are the sites of urine production. So let's just follow urine, the gross anatomy all the way out, and then we'll come back and pick up the microscopic anatomy. So this is the base of the pyramid, and this is the papilla. So urine production would go from the base to the papilla, and then it would dump into these structures. These structures are called calyces. The singular is calyx. Calyx means cup. So what I want you to imagine is that little tip of the pyramid is surrounded by a cup, right? Like a funnel. That makes sense? So it's dumping into a funnel. This little funnel is called a minor calyx, and it would completely surround the tip of that pyramid. You're looking at a section of the pyramid, but it's a three-dimensional structure, and it would actually point into there. So this is called a minor calyx. And when you gather up more than one minor calyx, you gather it into a major calyx. Is that good? So that's a major one. Okay, so this is a minor one, right? These are two minor ones dumping into a major one. Now, you're only looking at it two-dimensionally here, but just so you know, there are actually other pyramids dumping into it. You can kind of see where one's dumping right there, okay? Calyx, C-A-L-Y-X, calyx. Okay, so minor calyx, major calyx. All of the major calyces dump into this big tub. So you little cup, dump it into a bigger cup, dump all of the bigger cups into a bathtub. This bathtub is called the renal pelvis, okay? And what I'm doing is I'm gathering urine, and the urine is on its way out of the kidney at this point, okay? So you gather it up into the renal pelvis, and then you dump it into the ureter, right? And then the ureters will dump it into the urinary bladder for storage, urinary bladder for storage, and then you pee it out the urethra. Okay, so the whole gross anatomy of the urinary system is kidney, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra. That's the whole basic organs that you have to deal with. Now, a lot of people get ureters confused with urethra, but to me, urethras doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. Does it to you? No, I really haven't ever heard anyone refer to urethras plural. So you got two ureters, you got one urethra. Good? Okay, all right, so we did the medulla, renal papillae. Okay, so let's do it one more time, and then we will go into some other anatomy. Okay, so I want you guys to follow the gross anatomy of the production of urine from the site at which it's produced until it hits the toilet. You ready? Okay, so where do I start? Yeah, you basically are going to start right about here, right about the base of the pyramid, base of the renal pyramid, and then it's going to go to the renal papilla and then dump it into minor calyx and then major calyx and then pelvis. then renal pelvis, ureter, bladder, urethra. Nothing makes urine except the kidneys, Joe. Just so you know, your bladder does not make urine. It just stores it because it's inconvenient to pee constantly, right? You make urine constantly, but you don't pee constantly. So you have to have a little holding tank that holds out about a pint at any given moment. Everybody good with that? Okay, so now I want to do the vasculature and the innervation of the kidney, and we'll start addressing this again. So first, let's just do innervation. Innervation is easier. So the innervation has of the kidney, it has both sensory innervation and motor innervation. If you've ever been hit in the kidneys or had a kidney infection, you know that your kidneys can hurt. Yes? What kind of innervation do you think it is? Autonomic, visceral sensory or somatic sensory? It's visceral sensory. Yeah, it's visceral sensory innervation. They can feel pain. And then with the motor innervation, it's autonomic motor innervation. Primarily what it's doing is controlling the diameter of the blood vessels that go to the kidney via smooth muscle. Here's something that's kind of interesting. We know that the sympathetic innervation, sympathetic nervous system, controls the diameter of the vessels. We also know that the kidneys have a parasympathetic hookup, but nobody's ever figured out what it does. We don't know what the parasympathetic innervation to the kidney does. It seems as if it wouldn't have been sustained evolutionarily for 100,000 years of human evolution plus mammalian evolution before that if it didn't do something, right? Like at some point somebody would have just had a mutation that made it go away and then they would have lived just fine and you would see some variation. But we don't even really see much variation. It seems as if pretty much everybody has parasympathetic innervation to the kidney and we've messed with it, but we don't know what the hell it does. So job for you. There you go. There's a research project for your PhD. You would totally get that crap published, I promise. Okay, so now let's go back to the blood flow. Okay, blood flow through the kidney. All right, so this is the figure that we're going to do blood flow with. Okay, this figure makes Melanie happy because Melanie likes flow charts. They make me super happy. They make the world feel controllable and understandable. I'm like, I don't want to have this discussion. Can you make a flow chart? And then I will email you about it. Okay, so as we mentioned, you already told me that all of the blood that's going into the kidney comes from the renal artery and all of it leaves the renal vein. And I know you know this, but I'm going to make you do it anyway. The blood going into the renal artery comes from what vessel? Abdominal aorta. And the blood leaving the renal vein will end up in what vessel? Inferior vena cava. See how smart you are? All these big words you're just throwing out, making yourself feel superior to other people. It's really good. You're good. Just remember, it's also much easier for people to be smarter than this, right? It's good for you to be smart, but it's also better for you to be smarter. So go in the renal artery, and now we're going to follow just the gross anatomy first, and then we'll pick up the microscopic anatomy. You ready? Okay, so in the renal artery, and then this vessel right here branching off of the renal artery is called a segmental artery. Okay, and now we're going to follow it up. Watch. We're going to go up the side of a pyramid. That's called an interlobar artery because it goes between these lobes. Does that make sense? Interlobar artery. And then you arch around the base of the pyramid, and that artery is called an arcuate artery. Yes? Arch around the base of the pyramid. And then you give rise to these little bicycle spokes that are going up from the arch, and those are called interlobular arteries. So the interlobular are these guys right here. Now, which one sounds bigger, a lobe or a lobule? Lobe. So these are the interlobar arteries, yes, between these lobes. These are the interlobular arteries, and they're smaller between little lobules. That makes sense? Okay, so everybody okay with that? Okay, I'm just going to finish the gross circulation, and then we'll come back and pick up the microscopic circulation. So this is all what you would be able to see without a microscope. Okay, after you go past there, just so you know, you go to the microscopic circulation, which is where all the action happens. But let's just follow the gross anatomy first, and we'll go back and add in the microscopic anatomy. Okay, so gross anatomy ended up at the interlobular arteries, yes? And then you're going to go back out via a mostly parallel path. After you do this, which we haven't talked about yet, we're going to go back out, and we're going to go interlobular veins, yes? And then arcuate veins, right? We're going parallel. And then what? Interlobar veins. Okay, and here's the weird thing. Some Yahoo decided that these veins are not segmental veins. They should be. Can't we all agree? If these were segmental arteries, those should be segmental veins. But they don't even get a name. They're just considered continuations of the interlobar veins. So in your head, you can call them whatever you want, just don't write down segmental. I always call these should be named segmental veins. And then this is, of course, the renal vein. Okay? So you ready to do it one more time? Just one more time, and then we'll go back and add in the details where this occurs. Okay, so you guys do it for me this time. Renal artery 2, segmental 2, interlobar, interlobar 2, arcuate, okay, 2, interlobular, and now back, lobular veins 2, arcuate 2, lobar, interlobar 2, the continuation of the interlobar that should obviously be called segmental, to the renal veins. Okay, so everybody good with that? So what we have to add in is the microscopic circulation, because you notice we didn't tell any capillary stories here, and we didn't talk about this story when we were there. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go from those interlobular arteries, which are up here, right, at the base of the pyramid, okay, and we're going to have to blow that up and bring it over here, okay. Now, what we're going to have in this structure is we're going to have blood tubes next to P tubes, yes? Okay, for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the blood tubes. You with me? So the blood tubes are capillaries, and they look like capillaries. They're reddish, purplish, that kind of thing, right? The P tubes are P-colored, right? And we're going to come back and pick those up in a minute. So what's going to happen is they're going to run close enough to one another that you're going to have opportunities for exchange. Okay, but for right now, we're going to follow the blood in and follow the blood back out while we are thinking about the fact that the blood will be different when it goes in and out. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So just to orient yourself, here is the arcuate artery. Yeah, here is the interlobular artery. Okay, now the blood is going to be cleansed after it leaves the interlobular artery. That's where all of these processes are going to occur. Okay, so it's going to leave the interlobular artery. Now follow me. See this vessel right here? This is called the afferent arteriole, and it's going to lead to our first capillary bed, which is a little ball of capillaries called the glomerulus. Okay, do you see that little ball of capillaries? That little ball of capillaries is going to be super high pressure, so don't be at all surprised that that is where filtration occurs. Okay, so the glomerulus, you with me? Okay, so, and then I'm going to leave the glomerulus, so afferent arteriole, glomerulus, and then I'm going to leave the glomerulus via the efferent arteriole, but I haven't done the other two processes yet, right? So I still need to have the blood tubes next to the P tubes for a little while. So the efferent arteriole will lead to these tangled capillaries. Do you see them? Those up there are called peritubular capillaries because they wrap around the tubes, the P tubes, right? And then these guys right here are the other thing that you could have. So you could have peritubular capillaries or these. These are called the Vasa Recta, and the Vasa Recta means straight vessels. So those wrap around just a different part of the P tubes is what they do. So peritubular capillaries are Vasa Recta. So what's happening is as you go through here, you did filtration here, and then collectively in these places you are going to do reabsorption and secretion. Okay? And then by the time you've done those three processes, we can probably agree that you're pretty much done with the blood. Yeah? You've done filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. And so what happens after that is the blood gets dumped back into this vein. What is it? No. Interlobular vein. Okay? And it will be cleansed. It will be lower volume. You shouldn't have lost any of your nutrients, but hopefully you lost most of your waste products, right? It's going to go back into the interlobular vein and then into the arcuate, right? And then I'm on my way out from arcuate, interlobar, should be called the segmental, and then renal. Does that make sense? Okay, so what you just did on that story was the blood story. Here is the mistake that most people make. They start out in the glomerulus and all of a sudden they end up in the urine. But that's not what you're supposed to do, right? You are supposed to only end up in the urine if, for instance, you're a waste product. If you are a red blood cell, you should start in the blood and end up in the blood, right? But people get confused because there's two sets of tubes that are going relatively parallel to one another. And so you start out in one story and all of a sudden you skipped over into the other storyline, but that's not what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to start out in one story and end up in the other story. Okay, is everybody okay with that? Okay, so that is this whole story, and we already did the autonomic nerves. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in the P-tube story and make sure that we can tell this all together. Okay, so basically when you look at the microscopic anatomy of the kidneys, you will see that the kidneys have about 1 million of these structures per kidney. These structures where the blood tube comes next to the P-tube so you can get exchange, those structures are called nephrons. And those are the functional part of the kidney, okay? And of course they are located right at the base of the pyramids right there, just at the edge between the medulla and the cortex is where they're located. And what they are going to do is they are going to change the volume and composition of the blood, and everything that comes out of the blood ends up in the pee. So these are called nephrons. There are 1 million of them per kidney. They work their little butts off. They filter out 47 gallons per day. They filter your entire blood volume every single minute. So you have about 4 to 5 liters of blood. Your kidneys can, at their highest level, filter out that much blood volume per minute. So they are working very, very hard to keep your blood clean. Okay, so you got about 1 million of them per kidney. They're kind of redundant, so you can actually live with a single kidney. You need to be nice to it if you only have one. So for instance, you probably shouldn't drink too much. You probably shouldn't take those medications that are really hard on your kidneys. You should probably pee on a regular basis. Do you have any friends who won't pee unless they're at home, or won't poop unless they're at home? It's terrible for your kidneys. Terrible. If you think about it just conceptually, the stuff that is sitting in your bladder is stuff that your body wanted to get rid of. And so it is high in waste products, right, and high in potential toxins, and you're sitting it against epithelial tissue. And what can you tell me about the rate of cell division with epithelial tissue? It's really high. So now you're sitting toxins against epithelial tissue, and you are increasing your lifetime risk of bladder cancer. And if you don't poop regularly, first of all, you're probably going to be a jerk, because you always got to poop. And then second, you are increasing your lifetime risk of colon cancer. So you just got to get it out. Like if your body wants to get rid of it, you might want to trust it. She's like, yeah. She's like, oh crap, you're giving me anxiety and now I have to pee. Thanks. Okay. So I hate peeing in places anyway. I'm just too damn busy. I'm like, I do not have time to pee. Like, who has time for peeing? I do not have time to do it. And my little boy, he's probably just like me, because like he would literally pee his pants till he was like 6, just because he's like, I am playing. There is playing to be done. There is no time to break for peeing. And I'm like, you just literally peed your pants because you wouldn't stop playing. And he's like, I was almost at the end of a level. I'm like, well, at least you were sitting on the floor. That's really good. I'm glad. And he did it on purpose until he got in trouble like 12 times. Like, I'm not, you're learning to do laundry, and you're going to learn some self-control. Okay, so nephrons are microscopic. There's more than 1 million of them per kidney. They're redundant. You can live with a single kidney. There are 2 parts to the nephron, and they are the vascular component, which we already went through, which is the blood tubes part. And then the other part is the P-tubes part, but it's not called P-tubes part. It's called the tubular component, or the uriniferous tubule, which is the P-tubes. Okay, so let's look through that. Let's look through that. Okay, so this right here, the glomerulus, like I said, is the first part where the blood and the pee have tubes close enough to do any exchange. So stick with me for a second. The glomerulus contains blood at relatively high pressures for reasons I'll talk about in just a second. Stuff gets pushed out of the glomerulus and it gets caught because there's a glove around the glomerulus. Do you see that? It's called the capsule. Now, sometimes they call it the glomerular capsule, and sometimes it's called Bowman's capsule for the guy who found it. But importantly, the capsule is the thing that does the catching, right? It's the first place that you have anything that's going to end up in the urine. That makes sense? Now, why am I saying that? Because people use the term glomerulus and the term glomerular capsule interchangeably, but they're not interchangeable because one of them contains blood and one of them contains pee. Yeah? Okay, so the capsule. Now the capsule, I've just done filtration. It has something that could end up in the urine, but I've still got to work on it, right? and I've got to work on it as it goes through. So we know how the blood is going through. Now let's follow the P. So it goes from the glomerular capsule into this super curvy tube right here. And that super curvy tube is called the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal because it's closest to the glomerulus. Convoluted means what? Curved, exactly. The close, curvy, small tube, which is exactly what it is. Tubule means a small tube. So the proximal convoluted tubule, so stick with me. And then from the proximal convoluted tubule, you go down and up in this that's called the nephron loop or the loop of Henle. Okay, you go down and up, and you're still doing reabsorption and secretion as you're going by. Okay, and then you go into the distal convoluted tubule for the same reasons. It's distal convoluted tubule. And then notice that when you're at the distal convoluted tubule, that's pretty much the last time you have blood tubes and P tubes next to one another, which is good because you're pretty much done with the blood. The blood, yeah, you're done with the blood and you're also done with the urine. So you're in the distal convoluted tubule. And then from the distal convoluted tubule, you will dump into a collecting duct. And the collecting ducts, one more time, are aiming toward the renal papilla, and that's why it looks striped. Does that make sense? So here is, okay, the same picture that you were looking at. Do you see? So this collecting duct is pointing down that direction. So the collecting duct collects the urine pretty much when you're done with it. Okay? All right, so let's do the whole damn thing from the side, first place that you had anything that was going to end up in urine until you hit the toilet. Ready? Okay. What's the first structure that will have anything that could end up in the toilet? The capsule. Yes, Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule. If it's got the word capsule in it, that's what you're talking about. Okay. From the capsule to where? Proximal convoluted tubule, and now where? Nephron loop. Then distal convoluted tubule. So the loop is between the proximal and the distal. Okay. Nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, now where? Collecting duct. This is actually part of the distal convoluted tubule, and it dumps into the collecting duct, right? And then the collecting duct makes its way out, how? To the renal papilla. Now do the rest of it. Renal papilla, minor calyx, then major calyx, then renal pelvis, then ureter, urinary bladder, urethra, toilet. Make sense? Or floor, if you were my 6-year-old. Yeah. Or backyard. Did any of your kids, any of you guys have kids? No? Nobody has kids? Oh my God, my kids love, don't you have kids? No? Oh my God, he went through a period in which he loved peeing in the backyard.
That's because it's awesome.
Which I actually thought was really funny. I was actually kind of envious. I mean, just pee anywhere, right? If I'm camping, I have to like protect myself from peeing on my shoes by like holding it like this. Doesn't seem quite fair. Okay, so now next time what we're going to do, or actually it might be on the video, I'll look and see whether it should be on the video, is we're going to add just a little bit more detail, figure out why these are so high pressure, and make the story make sense, and then talk a little bit about histology, and then probably move on to lymphatic from there. Everybody good? So I think you guys have a good big picture understanding of what the kidneys do. The urinary system is actually kind of interesting, don't you think?